for joining me for the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Howie Jacobson. Hey everybody, welcome to Plant Yourself. I'm your host, Howard Jacobson, and this was about to be the first week that I have not released an episode since forever. I just didn't have anything on the docket. I didn't plan well, and the book that I am writing with Peter Bregman is due on Sunday, and we lose an hour on Sunday, so it's due even sooner than I thought, and we are really spending all of our time trying to get this manuscript in as good shape as possible, and so I just did not take the 3 to 4 hours to record an episode. And I know I need to be, flexible and gentle with myself, and still it just didn't feel right. But I clearly didn't have time to go, find a guest, prepare, do everything. But then I saw on my calendar that a long time ago I had agreed to be on Chef AJ Live, on her live stream, which I think goes to Facebook and YouTube, and I don't know, maybe I was on Twitch, I'm not really sure. And anyway, we had a great conversation. It was just really fun. And she was, sort of interviewing me about the time that I spent in lockdown in South Africa. We talked about that a little bit and some lessons that I learned from that experience. And also then we talked about the book that is in the process of being written. And actually in the conversation, some things came up. There were people who had questions, who had written them in advance or were typing real-time comments that I started talking about. And actually Peter and I changed one of the chapters in response to these questions. We added a bunch of stuff and clarified stuff. So it turns out that thing that I was dreading having to do, like take an hour out of my day to talk to Chef AJ when I need to be writing, was actually the perfect thing to do. And so you can just go to her YouTube live channel and watch it, but I have the audio recording. And so I am going to what's the vegan version of making omelets from eggs or making lemonade? It wasn't a lemon. It was just, what I had at hand. So I hope you enjoy it. Chef AJ, as always, is a ball of energy, is a very generous host, asks great questions. And we had a blast. And we talked about how you can change other people. Specifically, her folks who have seen the plant-based light, who have gotten healthy, and who want to convince the people around them to move in that direction. And you can imagine all the frustration and struggle that people go through when they don't have a strategy or tools. So that's the hope. That's one of the hopes of this book. It's a business book, but it's also very much for anyone who wants to change anyone for the better for any reason. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Chef AJ.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. Today's guest is Dr. Howie Jacobson. He has a wonderful podcast. If you haven't listened to it, I really want you to check it out. He's co-written many books with some of the luminaries in the plant-based world, and he's here today to check in and see what he's been up to and tell us about the new book he's writing. Please welcome Dr. Howie Jacobson. It's very nice to see you again.
Hey, it's beautiful to see you too. It's been a long time.
I know, I can't believe it, because I remember contacting you a year ago and you were in lockdown in another country. What was that like?
Yeah. So we were, my family and I went to South Africa. It was, we had lived there like 9 years earlier. And so we kind of wanted to just sort of go back, see people. We had a friend who's in her 80s who was planning on moving. And so we thought it was like, it wasn't a great time to go. And then it got like, we bought the tickets in like November of 2019. And then it just kept getting worse and worse. And like, should we go? We had to stop in New York. And we kind of just made this, I think it was probably a dumb decision. Like, oh, let's just go for it. Like, it really wasn't clear how bad this was going to get. And then we got there, and there's like three cases in South Africa of COVID by the time we arrived, but there was hysteria. And at that point, New York was starting to get bad. So like, imagine going to somewhere and everybody thinks you have the plague. Like, first thing we were supposed to register with the government, tell them everywhere we were going. Like, I don't want to do that with my government, let alone South Africa. And then the tourism board came and said, you have to get all the, it was very weird and scary. And then we were going to be traveling around, but we couldn't. All the flights were canceled. You couldn't even, there were checkpoints. You couldn't get a rental car and drive from one province to another. So we're like, okay, well, we're stuck here in the place that we first went to. And we can't afford to stay at this hotel like indefinite. You can't afford to stay at a fancy hotel for a long time. Like, what are we going to do? We started looking at flights home. And just about that point, the airline went bankrupt. South African Airways stopped flying. And like, I'm a very rational person. Like, I'm always thinking about, like, what are the possibilities? I don't get hysterical. So my wife said, South African Airways has been like in Chapter 11 bankruptcy for a while. Are we sure we should book on them? I'm like, look, honey, it's a national airline of a large country. They're not going to just let them. They let them. So now we can't leave, and we have to find a place. And we end up finding this a place that has like 12 bungalows on 80 acres. So it wasn't like, little hotel rooms and like, okay, you guys stay there. We're not allowed to go out. We're not allowed to go shopping. We're not allowed to walk around. This was when like people in South Africa were getting fined and jailed for walking their dogs outside. Like they thought, we know now that outside is like the safest place to be. But at that point, like, no. So the guy who owned this place, everybody else had left. Like, we're the only people there. He's supposed to go and get our groceries for us. He's like old and has asthma. He's like risk profile for COVID. We're like, we're not going to let you do that. And he's like, well, but the government can take away my license. So I ended up like hopping the fence and walking to the grocery store and back and hoping no one would see me. So like, I'm like, basically, aside from paying, I'm like stealing food, like breaking all these laws. And that's kind of what it was like until then finally the US State Department said, hey, we have one flight if you want to take it. Otherwise, we don't know when you'll ever be able to come home. So
was that scary for your family?
It might have been. I mean, we were in a pretty remote area. Like, what I was concerned about was like the thing was going to spread in townships. It was going to spread in Johannesburg. It was going to spread to like really highly populated areas they're already immunocompromised because of HIV. The government is essentially largely incompetent and corrupt. Like, I was worried about like civil breakdown. I was also worried about supply chains breaking down, because where we were, it doesn't really grow much of anything. There's like a rural Zulu area that had some resorts, like everything was trucked in. And it's like, yeah, so the first thing I did when we realized we were in lockdown is like, I went and bought like all these staples, like, 50 pounds of rice. And it's really interesting. Like, so when I think about eating well, like I think about like really high level, I think about you and Dr. Goldhammer. Like, you're my sort of like, you would never, ever deviate, like, and here we were, and like the best you can do is like baked beans with sugar, right? It was like really interesting to think about food as survival. Like, I wasn't going to have the meat. I wasn't going to have the cheese, but like, you know what? White flour and sugar could save our lives. Like, it was really interesting to think about what am I getting, and they don't have any brown rice in these little, like, the stores there, imagine like a tiny little general store outside of like a national park. They've got Chef Boyardee, they've got flashlight batteries, they've got tampons, they've got, Siggy yogurt or something, but that's it. Like, this isn't Whole Foods. It's not Wegmans. And so like, okay, well, white rice, like that was the best we could do for like 2 weeks. And it was really interesting to see like how, how your standards change when your goals change.
Wow. Well, just so you know, I'm not as perfect as Dr. Goldhammer. I love white rice, white basmati, and I do eat it. And I think in an emergency, I would be a lot less strict. How long did you end up staying there over the time that your vacation was scheduled for?
Yeah, we stayed for an extra, say, week and a half. It felt like much more because like the vacation lasted for 2 days. Like it was clear, like once we got there, like, oh, this was a big mistake. I mean, it was, I mean, I'm glad we went. It was painful. We had a lot of, it was me and my wife and my 2 adult children, and we were kind of like forced to confront each other in ways that we hadn't. So there was a lot of painful growth in there. But basically it was a month in a kind of limbo. And I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me because like we were in a beautiful part of the world. Like, it really is it's not a life-threatening problem that, oh, there's the mountain that I want to go hike in and they won't let me, but it was.
How did you spend your days there? And were there other Americans that were stranded there as well?
No, we were the only foreign elements. Like everybody in this town knows each other. And we knew a lot of people from before, but no, there was nobody else. Then after about 2 weeks, a family left Johannesburg because like people in the cities in lockdown were going crazy. Because one of the first things was the I guess the finance minister came on television and said, I beg of you, don't start panic buying. And up to that point, no one had been panic buying. But guess what happened the minute he said that?
Panic.
Panic buying. So, so this one family went from Johannesburg and they got another bungalow, like, far, like 200 feet away from us. The other funny thing was that there were these troops of vervet monkeys who were really good at breaking and entering. And so we would come back and like one kid had like left their bedroom window open a bit and like our kitchen was trashed. And like there was, bread and clementines on the floor. So they opened the peanut butter. So I spent my days, I did a lot of, I brought some podcast equipment. So I did a podcast every day, just kind of my thoughts, what's going on. And my podcasts are all interviews. So this was different for me. This was almost all of them were just me talking for half an hour. It was probably just therapy, to be honest.
Are they still available on your website?
Yeah, they're all there. They're like from like the 370s to 400.
Nice. How many podcasts, if you joined us late, this is Dr. Howie Jacobson. He co-authored Whole with Dr. Colin Campbell, Proteinaholic with Dr. Garth Davis, Sick to Fit with Josh Lajani. He's going to be talking about an upcoming book, which is perfect for the question that has been sent in. But we were just catching up because we haven't seen each other for a while. And Monica's saying she likes your shirt, and I mentioned that too. And you got that in South Africa?
I did. It was funny. Like we went to this store. Like you don't buy souvenirs at the beginning of your trip, right? We're like, oh, these are nice jackets. They're nice shirts. So we like 3 of us got them, like a tiger and a lion and like whatever, and a jaguar. And then like the next day, the mall closed down, like that little strip mall area. So I don't know if you can see it better.
That's a good looking shirt, and you're a Leo, so it's perfect.
Yeah, so I wore it specifically for our conversation.
So how did you guys spend your days? Just worrying, or actually, because you couldn't go outside pretty much?
Well, we could go outside in our little, in the 80 acres. So we did a lot of walking around. There was this is like a big wedding venue. So like the bungalows and also had a big space, and the owner kind of let us have the run of the place. So he had a little Wi-Fi router. So we would like huddle on this one bench that was close enough to the Wi-Fi, and I would do work. We would, it's 8 hours different, 7 or 8 hours difference to time difference. So like none of our friends or family would be awake until like 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So honestly, it felt a little bit lazy. Like there wasn't anything to do. Like I'm a fairly anxious person, just like I rev high. And it was really challenging to like, oh, there's nothing to do. Like I could go for a walk. I could, make some breakfast. Are we low on anything? Should I sneak out to the store? But it was like a reminder of subsistence. Like life doesn't, there was something nice about it wasn't that complicated. Like, what am I going to do? I can't build a plane. I can't, like, we're in conversation, like every 3 days I'd get some email from the US State Department and I'd be like, oh, good, something to worry about. And then between that, it was just, oh, you know what? I'm an animal on this planet. I'm basically just trying to get my needs met. Like I got to eat, I got to drink, I got to sleep, I got to pee, I got to like, it became very simple.
Did the State Department know you were there, or did you actually contact them?
We contacted them. I can't remember how I found out that they were working on this, but a lot of it's a blur. We would watch television, and so we would see the South African news, and then at 2 p.m. they had CNN, so we'd watch Andrew Cuomo when we thought he knew what he was talking about. And I'm trying to remember how I got in touch with the State Department, but it was like a moment of adulting where I'm like, I think what really triggered me to do something was when I found out that our airline had gone out of business.
That is something.
Because we got an email, we went through this travel agent, because I know nobody does that anymore, but there's one travel agent specializes in African travel, and they got us really good rates. And they emailed and said, you're going to need to find another way home. I'm like, but I paid. And they're like, yes. I was like, that's not fair. They're like, yes.
Oh, so you never, when a company goes bankrupt, you don't get your money back.
No. I mean, it's funny because they're not entirely bankrupt. They're still flying in South Africa, and they keep sending me their magazine. I'm like, we ended up, the flights home, we didn't know how much they were going to be. Like the State Department said, we'll bill you later and sign here. And like, okay, I don't think we have a choice. Like,
wow. Did you get the bill yet?
Yeah, we got the bill. Let's put it this way. It completely obliterated our stimulus checks.
Wow. Well, I'm happy you're home.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you Plant Yourself podcast. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts, but you're one of the ones that I do. It's fantastic. When did you start it? What made you start it? Do you enjoy doing it?
I love it so much. It's the vehicle through which I've met some of my favorite people in the world. It's like when you introduced this, you said, I'm going to introduce you to great people. I thought of the podcast as I want to introduce myself to great people. I started doing it around 2013. Right when Whole was out, and I thought like my plan was I wanted to have a conversation with John Robbins, who was like, he was the guy who started it all for me, Diet for New America, and it's like he's one of my heroes, and I would love to talk with him. And if I have a podcast, maybe I can ask him. Like I have a plausible reason for, rather than just saying, hey, I want to talk to you, I'm your fan. Like that sounds a little creepy, So I started the podcast, and then after like 30 episodes, I'm like, all right, I'm ready. And so I emailed John Robbins, and he agreed. So it started out mostly me talking to cookbook authors, because I wasn't very sophisticated about I'd written a book with Colin Campbell kind of about the science, and it was all about the food, right? It was about nutrition. Like, well, who's doing interesting stuff? Oh, who is Happy Herbivore? She's got great books. Let's talk to Lindsay. Or Susan Voisin has a book on fat-free vegan and a blog. And let's talk to her, and Kathy Hester and you. And And gradually, as I started talking to people and hearing their stories, I got interested in other things. Like your story is not about food, right? I mean, when you talk about your childhood and traumas and things you had to overcome and mindsets, so that got me really interested. So I started talking to researchers about depression, anxiety, different modalities for dealing with things. I started talking to coaches. I started talking to environmentalists, um, doctors. And so gradually my range of interest in the podcast has expanded to the point where it's now whoever the hell I want to talk to, I'm going to talk to, and if anyone wants to listen, that's fine.
Hey, so it's interesting because I didn't know that I was going to do a show every day, and you are my 443rd episode since the pandemic. And I just went on your website, and you've done 453 podcasts. How
Yeah.
many years did it take you to do that? And I'm posting a link to the podcast, guys, right now in the chat and on the website.
So it's been this is the 8th year. So I've averaged 52 a year, except for that stint in South Africa where I was doing them daily. Um, yeah, it's funny. I look at that and it really contradicts this belief I have about myself. Like I don't have staying power. Like I do something and then I have to move on. Like, look at you. You've stayed with something for a long time. I'm very proud of it.
So when you get into those numbers, it's hard to remember every guest. I mean, vividly, but I'm just wondering, do you have a favorite or several favorites that stick out in your mind? So people that are watching, they're just hearing about you. Where would you direct them?
Yeah, well, some of them have been like I love interesting conversations, but it's like reading a work of fiction. Like you read it, you enjoy it, and then you put it down, and it doesn't. But then there's others that were like so useful. So and some of them really like after the conversation, I'm like, I got to do things differently. I have to learn about this. I have to change what I'm doing as a coach, as a teacher to be more effective because I didn't know about this. And now I do. And I don't know enough. So one of those was a book by a guest called Scott Carney, who wrote a book about Wim Hof way back before Wim Hof was famous, about What Doesn't Kill Us. And it was about cold exposure and basically the importance of environmental stress. And you and I are both well versed in the the pleasure trap, the motivational triad, and the idea that human beings are programmed to do easy stuff. Right? The whatever, oh, I'm going to rest. Oh, I'm going to eat whatever is highest calorie density. Oh, I'm going to avoid any sort of, and that was okay it's not a flaw, right? That worked for thousands of years because our environments naturally restricted what we could do. If you laid around all day, you'd die because you wouldn't get anything done. You only ate honey and sweet fruit, you'd die because there wasn't around that much, right? You know what? Eat a grub, eat a root. And what I realized was we were also missing from our environment, not just, the need for exercise and the abundance of healthy food to the exclusion of everything else. We also were missing stress. And like if you go through life at 68 degrees Fahrenheit and 52% relative humidity, then your nervous system is actually like a dog without a job. It's going to start chewing on furniture, right? So that was episode 197. That made a huge impact on me.
Nice.
Another one that I loved, 224, Will Bonsall. So I'm a plant-based eater. I think I'm a vegan. I don't exactly know what that means for me. I haven't done anything that would be considered not vegan in 8 years. And I'm very interested in permaculture, in kind of farming and gardening that is in keeping with how nature works. And most of that discipline involves using animals, whether it's, the guy in South Africa who says that holistic grazing of cattle is what's going to restore topsoil, Or you should have chickens in your garden because they're going to eat the mulberries and poop fertilizer, and they're going to eat, like, I love chickens. And this one guest is a veganic permaculture gardener named Will Bonsall. And he's also known, he's this like the Noah of seeds. He has an ark where he stores all these seeds that are from plants that have gone, pretty much extinct. And it's like they don't taste very good now, but who knows when we're going to need this genetic resilience and variability in the future. So that really got me gardening in a veganic way. Like if you come to my house and I feed you those giant sweet potatoes and I fertilize with cow manure, how vegan is that?
Interesting.
Right? Or even if I eat tofu that I buy at the store, tofu's pretty cheap, like $2, $3 a pound. It's cheap because it's being subsidized by the pig industry. Because when you make tofu, you've made tofu, right, from scratch?
I'm allergic to soy, so no.
No. Well, if you do it, it's like you get your blob of tofu, and you also get this other mass that is pig food. So that gets sold, tofu companies sell that to pig farmers. So my cheap tofu is being subsidized by animal agriculture. So it made me realize, like, it's not just like, as vegans, we can get very defensive about, like, what are you eating? Did you eat this? Did you, and it's much bigger than that. And like, for me, vegan is one way of answering the question, how can I live in a life of justice and compassion? And so I started exploring all these other, like, what does that look like to live a life of justice and compassion? I talked to a lot of Black activists in the past year around what it's like to bring whole food plant-based to the Black community, what it's like to experience racism in the vegan community, right? Like, this just, a lot of the episodes are really kind of sort of painful for me, because I'm like, oh yeah, I do that shit. Can I say shit?
Yeah, you can say shit.
Okay. Like, yeah, I didn't realize that. Like, I own that. I apologize. You're right. That's, why didn't I think of that? And so it's also a kind of a stage on which I get to model a willingness to be wrong and to be corrected, which I think is important.
Right. Is there anyone that you've been wanting to have on the podcast that you haven't been able to get on so far?
Honestly, I would love to podcast with Bruce Springsteen.
I saw him in an elevator once at Cedar Sinai, but that was a long time ago.
Oh, nice. Yeah. No, I mean, there's a lot of sort of famous people who are sort of above my pay grade, but you know what? Rich Roll gets a lot of them. Like, and he's so good. Like, very often I'll be listening to one of his podcast interviews and I'm like, boy, I really want to talk to that person. And by the end of the interview, I'm like, I really don't need to talk to that person. I got it. Right. I think what I love is that what my niche is largely other people haven't heard of. Like, I like to be the introducer.
I feel the same way. I mean, with this show,
Mm-hmm.
I like to be the one that's telling the village about some great person.
Yeah. So, I mean, there have been people who haven't said yes. Yet, or who have said no, but
Is there anybody that you've interviewed that you think would like to be on my show, or that I should ask? Because that one, I don't want to say the name, but the one person I did ask, that person said no. And like, when people say no, it kind of hurts I don't like to ask people that I think are going to say no.
Let me think about it.
Okay.
I'm sure I have a list somewhere.
Yeah. And anybody that you think is great, I would probably like as well. So here, this is really interesting because I didn't know you were writing a new book. And this is so perfect because somebody sent in a question for you because they know that you've you do things dealing with behavioral change. So a lot of times that's what you've talked about when I've seen you at conferences and things like that. I actually met you at a conference. It was Summerfest, the first time I heard you speak. And what I really liked about you, and I'll always remember this, is before pandemic, I used to produce conferences. I did 19. This last year would have been my 20th in different cities like Vegas and LA mostly. And you were giving a talk at that there's this one room there in the engineering building that is not really ideal because you're way down there. You know what I'm talking about? It's like, it might be great if you're taking a college chemistry class, but you're way down there and the people are way up there. It's not very warm. You can't really interact as well. And you were giving a talk and your PowerPoint, they couldn't get it to work. And I have been in lectures so many times with people that are like real prima donnas that when the technology doesn't work, they flip out and then they yell at the people, like as if that's going to help, yelling at like some volunteer. And I just remember my first impression of you. And they say you don't have a second chance to make a first impression. He's like, you were so gracious. And just like what they teach us, I study improvisational comedy and stand-up, you went with it. Like you couldn't, and I'm guessing that's probably what you did in South Africa. Like you couldn't get the PowerPoint to work. So you didn't just like flip out and get mad. You just gave the talk to the best of your ability. And it was actually quite delightful. And you were like, and you would say something and said like, well, if the slide was, and I always remembered that about you. And I really liked you because of the way you behaved in that situation.
Thank you. I think you caught me at my best, right? I probably had a really good night's sleep the night before, and I was eating healthy vegan food. So I'm not always that gracious. I also remember that the mic didn't work and the AC was really loud.
But you did a great job. And remember when we saw each other in your home city, I was speaking at a Veg Fest, and they did not have the ideal situation. They put us in a room with all the vendors with no acoustics. And I had sort of like was in that position, and I wanted to get angry, but like there was nothing I could do about it. But you ran my tech, so I have nothing but fond memories of you. But anyway, so a lot of times when you speak, you do talk about behavior change, and it's perfect because the question that came in today from Natalie is about that. And then you happen to be writing a book, and you're going to talk about that too. The title, I believe you said, is you can change other people, or
right.
And of course my phone is not loading right now. This is killing me. All right, I'm going to have to look it up on email. Don't you? See, again, another example of when technology doesn't work. So I'm just going to be gracious. And luckily I can just jump screens here and get this question. I did, out of deference to the environment, I didn't print it out. But anyway.
Well, I'll tell you, there was a moment that prepared me for that and every other technological failure that's ever occurred, which is I was giving a talk to about 300 people at a conference in the year 2000, and I was relying on tech, and it failed. And I bombed. I've never received such bad reviews in my life. People were angry during the presentation. They were hostile. It was a conference that was part of a group where, had I done well, it would have made a difference to my career. And I had planned a video link hookup with someone in another country. This is the year 2000. Like, can you imagine how insane I must have been to think that was something reliable? I had not prepared properly, and that was such a bad experience. Like, I just went back to my hotel room and cried, and like, that will never happen again. And so I started talking to people like professional speakers, and I was like, how do you prepare for a talk? And they started telling me things like, have 3 backups. Mail your slides, have a computer with your slides, have a thumb drive with your slides. I think this might have been back in the time when we actually had floppy disks. I don't quite remember. Assume nothing will work. Can you give the talk from memory? Do you have something on paper? And if all else fails, just don't be a dick.
I know. Yep. I agree. You have to have a backup, and it's hard, especially like when I've done cooking demos and the electricity doesn't work, and it's like, okay, you got to find another way to entertain them. I used to study, public speaking with a coach, and he said there's 2 kinds of baggage: carry-on and lost. And so that anyway, so great. So I was able to pull up the question, and then you can answer it, and also then maybe talk in context of your book, because it sounds like what she's asking might be in your upcoming book. She says, I have two brothers who have both had quadruple bypass surgery in their 50s, and my 56-year-old sister has very high cholesterol, high blood pressure, and is overweight. The doctor wants to put her on statins as soon as possible. I have lovingly encouraged her and sent her lots of information over the years on the benefits of a whole food plant-based diet, but I simply can't get through to her. She makes every excuse in the book and firmly believes that this is genetic and there's no way around this. Can I change her mind, or do I just let it be? My brothers did make some changes after getting their chests cut open, but they too believe in moderation and think I'm a bit of a nut.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So it's a beautiful and painful question, and one that almost all of us face. And we don't have to be health nuts to face it. Like, we all have people around us that we wish would change. Right? And sometimes we want them to change for their own good, and sometimes we want to change because they're driving us crazy. Right? And so here's what I'll say. I don't know, in any given situation, I don't know how to change someone. What I can tell you is, based on research and practice, what are your best odds ways of approaching people? Right. So, and a lot of this, you remember Doug Lyle's great talk, How to Get Along Without Going Along, right? Sort of the psychology of basically he's saying, don't make yourself superior to them. Right. So that's kind of the basis. So how do we do that? Right. The first thing is, if I tell you what to do, in most situations, you will resist. Right? Because we all have a need for autonomy. Right? And especially so it's different. It's like if you come to me and you say, Howie, I got a question about something, and I give you an answer, you go, thank you. Right? So the question is, what kind of permission do you have to speak? Do you have permission to offer your opinion? Right? You've heard the expression, when I want your opinion, I'll
ask for it. Yeah, I love that.
Right. When I want your opinion, I'll give it to you. Right. So the first thing is we need permission before we can even begin to have the conversation. And there's a bunch of ways to try to get permission. Now, one of them is, in this case, it sounds like we're in a deficit. This person who's writing to you is like, how do her brothers, and is it her sister?
She has two brothers that both had open heart surgery that still believe in moderation. And the sister, who's overweight and has disease markers, doctor wants to have her go on statins right away.
Okay, so it's to her three siblings, of her siblings. How do they think about her? Right? Like, if you ask them, like, Blake, tell me about, let's I don't know, let's give our reader or our questioner a fake name.
Well, I gave her a real name, Natalie.
Natalie. Okay, great.
Yeah. So, you can give her a fake name if you prefer.
No, sorry, that flew past my consciousness. What do her siblings think of Natalie?
I mean, I don't know. I think Natalie's lovely. I know her.
They think, oh, we love her. She loves us. And boy, she's a pain about this health stuff. She can't let it go. Right? She keeps talking. You know what? We're going to get together. We're going to sit down. We're going to take bets on when she's going to bring up broccoli, right? Or, hey, or you don't need to go on statins, or high cholesterol is reversible, or it's, the food, your genes load the gun, your food pulls the trigger, right? When is she going to say that? We know it's coming. Oh, there it is, right? So they're already primed for defense. Right? You ever like come up to someone and tap them on the shoulder and they react kind of violently? Right? It's not that they think you're terrible, but their nervous system is oriented towards defense. So that's where my guess is Natalie is starting with them. So you're not going to, if something doesn't work, you don't just keep doing it more and more, harder and harder. Like, she's sending, okay, now I'm going to send them Forks Over Knives. Now I'm going to send them Cowspiracy. Now I'm going to send them Game Changers. Now I'm going to send them the starch solution. Now I'm going to send them Rip Esselson's TED Talk. Right? It's not working. Right? So what we have to do is repair that relationship or change how they think about you. So one is to, for a few meals, don't say anything. All right, just be with them and love them. And we have to do work on ourselves. So Natalie has to do some work on herself because she's approaching them in terms of a critic. Right. So the central theme of the book is, if you want to change other people, you have to become an ally rather than a critic. And critic could be, you're doing this wrong. Critic could be, here's some advice. Right? If I give you advice on how to eat, I didn't criticize you. I just said you should do this. Right? But what's implicit is, instead of what you're doing, I know better than you. Right? And it's really hard not to be, when we're angry or frustrated or sad or fearful, right? So Natalie's probably scared for her siblings. She loves them and she sees the path they're down. She's expressing out of fear. And when we express out of fear, it's really easy to be a critic because now we're in some sort of fight or flight, right? Like we're primed for worst case scenario, and we're communicating that to them. And, people who stress eat, the solution is not to give them more stress, right? There's some really interesting research on anti-smoking posters that really highlighted the dangers of smoking. Like the picture was like, a skeleton in a hospital bed with a cigarette, or the picture of lungs with all that gunk in them. And turns out that just, when smokers saw that, they got scared about what their smoking was doing for them. And in order to calm down, they smoked. Right? So we want to identify, we want to say, okay, so it's okay to have this negative emotion. It's okay to be fearful. Natalie, it's okay. I'm not saying don't have the emotion or suppress the emotion or change the emotion. Right? Honor the emotion that you're feeling. I'm scared. Now, the trick is, can you turn that into something positive? What's the positive behind I'm scared? So in other words, in order for Natalie to be scared, something must be true. It could, and for one of them is because I love them and I care about them. So all of a sudden, we've shifted things a little. Right? Like Natalie's in touch with my love and my caring, not my fear. And then the second thing is, when we see people doing self-destructive things, we make what's called a sort of a fundamental attribution error. Like people do stupid things because they're lazy or ignorant or stubborn. Right? We heard in the question, there's a lot of stubbornness in these three people, right? They just won't see the light. So what I want to ask is, what's the positive intent behind the dysfunctional behavior? Right? You know why people eat crap.
Because it's addictive and it's delicious.
It makes them feel good. Right? Don't eat crap, feel bad. Eat crap, I feel good while I'm eating crap. I feel blissful. My problems go away, right? Any addiction, right? So look at how our society thinks about addictions, right? These people, they have no willpower. They throw away their future on a drug. Like, it's all punitive. It's all critical. Instead of saying, what's it doing for them? What's the positive intent? Right? If you're eating crap, your positive intent is, I want to feel good. And then the question is, why don't you feel good without it? Right? Like something's missing. We have to address that. Right? When you broke your addictions, that opened up a space for you to get to know yourself in a whole new way.
Yeah.
Right? So it turns out that the sugar, which you thought was the solution, was actually blocking the solution and pointing to the solution at the same time. Oh, once I see I'm using sugar as a self-management tool and it has all these negative consequences, what could I do instead? What are some positive self-management tools that I can use to replace the sugar? Right? And I can't even begin to think about them until I separate myself from sugar. Right? You can't do this theoretically. Right? You can be eating sugar and be in therapy for 30 years and understand completely what's happened in your childhood and this betrayal and that trauma. As long as you're eating sugar, nothing's going to change. Right? So what's the positive intent behind their behavior? And you want that for them, right? Natalie wants them to feel good, to be happy, to feel abundant, to connect, right? Maybe they're part of communities or families where this is the normal food and they don't want to separate themselves, right? We want, like, these are good things: love, connection, positivity, happiness, bliss, pleasure. We don't want to say you don't want that. So when you think about that, we can then begin to empathize. And when you empathize with someone, you kind of make yourself an equal, right? Oh man, that's really hard. I totally, right? You know, you've had this quadruple bypass and I'm sure, tell me about it. Like, was it painful? Was it scary? And I know you want to eat better and you find it really hard. And it's like, I bet that's really scary. Right? Can you see the difference in the energy behind that? And why don't you just eat the
but it's just my natural inclination is to do what's not effective.
Well, if that weren't true, I wouldn't have a book to write. I'm not writing a book about how to get up in the middle of the night and pee.
When can we look forward to this book?
Probably September.
Nice. Well, maybe we can have you back on when it's out and then promote it that way as well. Talk a little bit more about it and maybe I believe you said you were doing it with a co-author.
Yep. And so it's basically, it's 4 steps. So the first step is get permission. So everything I've talked about so far is part of that. How do you get permission to have the conversation? And it's very, there's different stages. Like, it's easier to get permission if you say to me, hey, I need your help with something. Okay, then that's easy. If you say, oh, I'm so low energy and I'm gaining weight during this pandemic and I get headaches all the time, that's a complaint, right? You don't hear any agency in that. You don't hear any ownership. It's just, here's some bad things. There are ways to then try to get permission from that place. Like, it's still an opening. It's like, oh, wow, AJ, that sounds really, really tough. I'm sorry to hear that. Would you like to think it through with me? Right? It's a very non-threatening. It's like, would you like to hear my sermon about it? It's, would you like to think it through with me?
Does it matter if they ask for help though? Like, I wonder, obviously you shouldn't contribute to somebody that doesn't, it's not good to just go around and say, excuse me, I see you have this lifestyle disease. Why don't you, or you see somebody that's maybe overweight with a shopping cart full of junk. Most people wouldn't do that, but does it matter whether or not they ask for help?
Yes. Yes. So if they don't, if you are initiating, that's the highest bar you have to cross. So that's why you get right with yourself. Okay, I have this negative emotions. I'm going to convert it to a positive value that I identify with. I love them. I care about them. A coworker isn't doing their job right. I value my boundaries. I don't want to have to redo their job at night. I value the product that our company is putting out in the world, and I want it to be successful. Like, whatever it is, to get in touch with your positive intent, and then if you're initiating, to say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about something. Do you got a minute? Or can we chat about something? And then you state what you want for them. I really want to see you lick this disease. I really want to see, or something that they can hear. I would love to see you, not struggling with your weight anymore. And I'd love to explore some of the things that are getting in the way. Are you open to that? Right? Like that's the best you can do. And if you've been nagging for a while, one of the beautiful moves you can do is to own it. Is to say, I know I know how I've been. I've been telling you things. I've been beating the drum about this. And I know how annoying that is. And I'm sorry. Like that's not how I want to be here. I'd love to be part of the solution rather than reinforcing the problem. If you're open to talking about it, like when you own that, and when especially when we exhibit vulnerability, it's an invitation to the people around us to be vulnerable too.
Yeah, because if just nagging people worked, it doesn't. There's an old saying, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. And I'm wondering, do you think that, I don't know how much you listen to Dr. Lyle, but he often talks about whenever there's a problem in a relationship, often look to status. And I'm wondering if that ever plays a part, because I happen to know Natalie, and she's like fit, trim, healthy, and gorgeous. And I feel like sometimes people are, like you say, they're arriving on the defensive, but sometimes that if you're not, they're already defensive. You don't have to say anything. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, it's like ordering vegan food at a restaurant. All of a sudden, everybody hates you, or right. So so there are opportunities. Like none of us is getting through life unscathed. None of us doesn't experience pain and suffering and loss and weakness. Right. So one of the things you can do is be open. Like, does Natalie have any part of her life where she is not totally 100% in control of her behavior?
I know that she's watching because she just sent me an email saying, you are right. I'm scared for my siblings because our father died of a sudden heart attack at the age of 47. So if you're still listening, Natalie, just answer that.
Yeah. So there's a beautiful example of vulnerability to speak to them and say, when Dad died, remember how young we were? I was so scared. And you know what? The reason that I have been bugging you about this partly is because I don't want to experience that again. And I just want you to know that, like, that's where my heart is. And I know because I'm scared and because of my personality, I can come across as like preachy, and I know that turns you off, and I'm going to try to do better. But I want you to understand, like, this is really, really important because I love you so much and I don't want to go through that again. Like that's opening your heart. It's hard for someone to then say, mind your own business.
So, it's interesting because this really has made me think about a situation. And I have a cousin who was my closest cousin and more like a sister to me. And in 2010, she's a physician. She was diagnosed with breast cancer. And literally, I just said to her, I said, oh, you should read the China study. I wasn't like, I wasn't like that. I swear it was like, oh, I'm sorry. You and she hasn't talked to me now in 11 years. Mm-hmm. And how, is there any way, is there anything I can do to
What's the scariest truth you could tell her if you were to send her a text or an email or call her on the phone?
So much time has happened. I don't even think I can, 11 years. I remember I was really sad. And I remember talking to Dr. Lau. I said, oh, in about 4 years, she'll talk to you. And she still hasn't. And her daughter even wrote me and said, how dare you accuse my mother? And it's like, that's not what I was doing. And why can't people just know that you when you do this, even when you're a nag, it's from a place of love. You wouldn't do it to somebody you didn't care about. But I don't know how I could go back now 11 years later. I've moved, out of LA and everything to even.
Well, what I hear is that it's still on your mind.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that's what made me learn that, like, I do not give my opinion unless like it's like somebody asks me, or people I've had people like conferences say, talk to my son's overweight, talk to him. And I'm like, No.
Yeah.
That's not what
No,
you do.
here's what comes to mind is like what is up for you is not what happened 11 years ago. It's what's happening now. Like we were so close. I really miss you. And I think the way that I spoke to you when you had that diagnosis um, really turned you off. And I'm sorry. And I think about you all the time and I miss you and I would love to be in connection again.
Yeah. I remember at one point I did reach out and say, like, are you upset with me because of this? And she's like, no, I'm just busy. And you kind of feel like, no, that's not the truth because so I don't know, I'll think about it. Relationships are hard, man.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
This is great. Well,
Yeah.
I look forward to
So
that book.
so I'll give you one more thing, which is so like what do we do instead? Like once you've gotten permission, then we want to jump in and say, great, you give me permission. Read this, look at this, understand this, my intramyocellular fat, diabetes. Like we want to then blurt. Do not do that. Like, first of all, the information is absolutely the least powerful thing we have. Right? Because we know this because like people can change on a dime with just an offhanded comment, right? Or just seeing someone, like someone who just happens to watch you do an Instant Pot demo, and you make lentil soup, red lentil soup with the dates, and they try that, and you sing a song, and you stand on your head, and you're funny, and you flirt with the old men, and they go, "Oh, I love AJ. I'm going to do this," right? You haven't convinced them of shit. You haven't taught them anything. You've made them feel a certain way, and you've presented them with a path, an avatar. Like, oh, this I want to do this, right? So it wasn't the information in the lecture; it was something else. So what we want to do is get people to a place where where they're empowered, where they're taking ownership. So when someone gives me permission, what I don't do is, okay, here's what to do. What I do is I ask them a lot of questions. So as a coach, and the first one is, so what's the outcome you want? What do you want here? I told you what I want. What do you want? What would be, if you could solve this in exactly the way you'd want to solve it, what would it look like? Well, you know what? I'd be eating the way I eat now and I'd be healthy. Okay. Is that, what have you tried? Like you can get them to a place of sort of, creative helplessness. Like, okay, yeah, I would love that for you. I would love a world where I can eat chocolate 3 times a day and be healthy and lean. I would love that. I agree with you. I don't know how to help you get there. Right? But usually they won't say that. They won't. They'll say something real. God, I would love to have to stop worrying about. I would love to get this under control, so I know that I have 20 or 30 years left. So I don't feel like a ticking time bomb. Right? I would love to stop eating sugar. Right? People come to your ultimate weight loss. What do they want?
They want to lose weight usually and
want
stop the cravings.
Yeah, they want to eliminate negatives. I want to get rid of weight and I want to not feel bad. And then so I says, wait, what do you want? Like at a certain point, that becomes an interesting question. Like some point people can start asking it on their own, like, oh, I'm healthy now, but my life sucks. I'm in a bad relationship. I'm doing work I'm not interested in. And now I have all this energy. Gee, what am I going to do? Like Garth Davis talks about after he fixed his diet, he was like, I got to start running. I got too much energy. He became a gym rat, and and now he's so good looking that millions of scammers steal his picture every year. Wow. So helping people see like what's the outcome you want can start to, just like you turned yourself from defensive to negative to seeking a good, you want them to do the same thing. Let's go for something good. Great. What, you want to lose weight? Tell me what that would be like, right? So what's your why? Like, tell me what your life is like at your ideal weight. Ooh, God, I could have that. Tell me what your life is like when you are, when you don't need statins, right? So there's 4 steps. So this is the second one, is to identify an energizing outcome, right? And then the rest, I don't think we have time for now, but it'll be in the book, is, to figure out what's the opportunity and then crafting a plan to help them get there. And information, rather than you fire hosing them information, like as you're crafting the plan, they'll be like, well, I'm not really sure what to eat. How could you find out? Well, don't you have those cookbooks? Sure. Would you like me to send you one? Right. So it's constantly, you're taking a step back to invite them to take a step forward.
Nice. This sounds great. I hope you'll do the book on Audible as well, because that's my preferred way of reading a book these days.
I think we do have an audiobook contract. I think my co-author Peter will be probably reading it.
That's so, it's interesting because I've been posting the link to your podcast. In your last episode, this is really synchronicity, is how to change people without being an a-hole.
Yeah, it's on my mind.
Yeah, so that's great. Well, thank you. It's just great catching up with you.
Likewise.
I'm glad you're back home safe and your family's well. And seriously, when the book comes out, let's schedule something for, that week or so we can get people to buy it.
Awesome. I so appreciate you have been such a promoter of my work since we first met. You have introduced me to lots of people, given me lots of opportunities, and put some potatoes in my pocket.
Well, good. All I ask is, if you can think of somebody from your show that might be a right fit, please refer me.
I will absolutely do that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Howard. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow when we have a wonderful cooking demo from Marissa Wolfson. She's from the film Vegucated, and she has a new cookbook, family friendly. She's going to be making a peanutty sweet potato soup. If you see Kathy Hester, tell her I said hi.
Will do.
All right. Take care. Bye, everyone.
And there you have it. Chef AJ did my work for me, except for the introduction that I did at the beginning and this outro. And all I'll say about the outro is I think I saw a bicep the other day. My movement news is still working hard with kettlebells, almost ready to go from 12K to 18K. I don't know why I didn't get 16K. It would have been so much smarter, but I have this huge jump. And so I'm trying to max out reps because I'm still not able to do the heavier one with good form, but I think I'm getting there, and it feels really, really good. And my back is feeling better. And I actually went for a jog yesterday, and I saw my neighbor and his dog, and we jogged for a little bit. And so on the mend, and the weather around here is finally dried up enough that we can play ultimate frisbee on grass rather than on the university turf fields. And that's, of course, much better for knees, calves, ankles, all the bits down there that have to take a pounding. In garden news, I've not done a thing in the garden. I don't even know where it is. I've just been locked in my room writing. Mia has cleared away a bunch of debris for beds, and there's seed catalogs lying all over the house. So I expect to have some news for you soon as I find out. Anyway, back to the typing. I'm glad to kind of get this episode out there. It's Friday, 2:20 p.m. So I'm calling it a pass-fail pass. May not be an A+, but we're not grading by letters. This is done in the bag. I was talking to Peter earlier. He was telling me about an interview that Harlan Coben, the mystery adventure writer, gave to the New York Times, I think, and he said, when you evaluate your writing process, the only question is, did you produce pages? If you produce pages, it's a good process. If you didn't, it's not. So I produced audio pages. I hope you like it. Hope it's useful. And let us now move into thanks. All right, time for thanks. Thanks to Will Ridenauer for allowing me to use his beautiful song, Sabali Dawn, The Dance of Peace. You can find more of Will's music at his website, willridenauer.com. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Brittany Porter, Dominic Maurer, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Behrens, Tina Scharf, Tina Ahern, Jen Filikanovsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious Michelle X, Elsbeth Feldman, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Landry, Josina, Sarah Durkis, Kelly Cameron, Janet Selby, Claire Adams, Tom Franzek, Jeanette Bennett, Gila Cert, David Donahue, Blair Cyber, Dorona Vizov, Gio and Carolyn Argentati, Jody Friesner, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, Aviva Lael, Alicia Lemus, Val Linneman, Nick Harper, Bandana Chawley, Molly Levine, The Inscrutable Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Scharf, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Copel, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Sharon Hirschman, Linda Ayad, Holm Hedegaard, Isa Tuzinwa, Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Olakoski of Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Marani, Karen and Joe Crabtree, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Ann Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Peter W. Evans, Dennis Bird, Darby Kelly, Lori Fanny, Linnea Lundquist, Emily Iconelli, Levy Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan Picorni, Stephen Leenan, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Kartz, Deanne Bishop, Bilberry Elf, Marjorie Lewis, Tricia Adams, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Bayshore, Gunmarie Hagan, Tracy Gullidge, Laura Heaton, Meg from Mama Says, Stacey Stokes, Ben Savage, Michael Kay, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sally Robertson, Paranganchi, Amy Daly, Brian Tourville, Mark Jeffrey Johnson, Josie Dempsey, Karen Schmidt, Pamela Hayden, Emily Perryman, Allison Corbett, Richard Stone, Lauren Vaught of Edible Musings, Aaron Hasty, Sean Owen, Sagar Naik, Erica Piedra, Danielle Roberts, Michael Lushton, Sarah Johnson, Catherine Floyd, for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for now. As always, be well, my friends.